what's happening, right? He's not feeling good either, and he can't even get past the guy to start pushing him out. So we attached a rope, another person went down, we attached a rope to the limp body to pull them back. And I tell you what, it's very, very difficult to pull a limp body back in a tunnel and when you can't even push right from the front. You can't get past him to push him. So that was quite a challenge. And then we put another team down and they fainted. Then we put another team down and they fainted. And we were wondering what on earth was going on here. And what happened, of course, ultimately we realised it, I realised it, that smoke burnt up the air, and the air that we had followed with was not sufficient to be able to deal with the burning up of the oxygen, even though we kept on pumping in the air. This was one way, ultimately, that we found out that the Americans had never gone down the tunnels because they'd never had this problem. So we knew that they hadn't gone down. They just blew them up as soon as we came across them. Well, this was quite a challenge for us, and then what happened ultimately was that we searched the area and we found another entrance into the tunnel, and we went down to that entrance, and then we started and we decided never ever to use smoke again. It was useless. We used tear gas, but not smoke. So that was the entrance of the tunnel. There's the tunnel with some of the wire and that. There's a trapdoor inside the tunnel. There's this door. There's the size of the trapdoor. Incidentally, I took that photo myself. See that boot there? That's my boot. So I'm here like this, taking a photo. None of our guys could get through that one. We actually had to dig around it and then get into it, right? The Vietnamese are a very slight body, you know, and they were able to get into there quite easily. So that was the trapdoor. That's the standard trapdoor. Incidentally, when we found the trapdoor from underneath, right, and we could tell because you can see a little bit of daylight, right? It was, you never ever opened it, right? Because we had already found, after we blew smoke down the first tunnel, we found another trapdoor from the surface where the smoke was coming out. It had 17 booby traps around it. And if you opened the trapdoor, bang, right? So what we had to do was fire a couple of shots from underneath until our soldiers had heard the shots, and we positioned it and then found it from the surface, and then we cleared the booby traps and then went down the tunnels. Okay?
What were the booby traps, Sandy?
Mainly grenades that were set in the trees and around the trees. They were with pins, so that there were things like cords. If you pull the trapdoor up, you'd have it attached to a cord, the cord to a pin in the grenade would then go off. You know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
What about mines?
Sorry?
What about mines?
We didn't find any mines in this particular area. We were dealing with mines later on, a lot more. We were dealing with things like grenades, hand grenades, and grenades like we had, the American grenade. Like but there was also a grenade whereby you had that was the explosive on the end, like a bamboo stick coming down here in the handle. And then a cord running from it. Now, you'd throw the grenade, and at the end of the string would go out with the grenade, and then it would go off as soon as the string tightened. Sometimes the grenade had a fuse in it, which went for 3 or 4 seconds, but sometimes the grenade didn't have a fuse and it was instantaneous. So one of the guys, we had a sergeant in the assault pioneers. There was a sergeant in the assault pioneers of 1RAR who actually pulled the grenade and was going to throw it, but it went off immediately. Right? So he was killed. So we never found out all our time in Vietnam, 7 years, how they told whether it had a fuse in it or whether it didn't have a fuse in it. Right? Never knew. So that was one of the main things. Later on though, we were dealing with our own mines. I'll come back to that if you like. Just remind me to talk about mines again. Here's some of the gear that we got out of the tunnels. So a lot of gear, a lot of equipment. And you know, we got out over a half a ton of paper. Right? Thousands and thousands of documents. That's a photo of the crimp tunnels. Right? We actually went in here. We went in here, went along here, went up there, and that was when we decided, okay, there's got to be a better way. Right? So we found another entrance over here. We found this bunker. We went in here without, so all this area here was just tear gas and it wasn't smoke. And so we go along here and we find exits. So that was the diagram of the tunnels themselves. We worked there for about 5 or 6 days, and we cleared. We would have to go back in every day and clear it again because we'd find the enemy would be coming back in at night time. And when the enemy was coming back in at night time, it was a race to get the gear, to get the stuff out of the tunnel. And we saw stuff that we had to leave behind at some stage, and the next morning it was gone, you know, that sort of thing, yeah.
Did you ever encounter the enemy in the tunnel?
In this particular tunnel, we didn't, right? What actually happened was that the enemy withdrew. Because the enemy withdrew, what I was able to do was talk to the guys about making the tunnel our home and their home. In other words, we had the advantage because we were the aggressor down the tunnel. So that's what I talked about. That's a pretty difficult thing to sell, isn't it? Right? but that's what we did. So that we, I always had volunteers every time we came across the tunnel to be able to go down the tunnel. It was like their job, and they knew it, and they'll get them. Now, were enemy found down tunnels and confronted? Yes, there were, right? Only on a couple of occasions. We did lose, a couple of years later, we lost a guy who was shot down the tunnel. There were lots of booby trap entrances and those sort of things that we found later, but not in this particular tunnel. They withdrew. And let me leave it until the video comes on, and one of the enemy, the political commissar of that area, and the general of that area, he will answer the questions. We tried different ways of working with tunnels and using lots. That's not smoke, that's diesel mist. Here are some very basic booby traps that we found earlier in Vietnam. But basic, but see this one here, a lot of those in this clearing that we did. Right? It doesn't kill you, right? But it maims you, you know. These are the sort of things that happen. Initially very basic, but this we came across. They're very industrious, the Vietnamese. See the ones in the roof, right? Rice bags. Now we came across rice bags in Vietnam. There were, you know, stacks and stacks and stacks of them. You know, basically the enemy had been taking them, put them in the bush, and taking them from the villages, and we never ever found which ones of these bags had mines in or not. Right? You couldn't tell. you had to physically go over with a mine detector and find them first. So I don't know how they were doing it, but we couldn't work out a way. We physically found them, had to delouse them, and then take out the rice, because we never left the rice for them. That's a typical grenade made out of a piece of tin. There's that bamboo grenade I was talking about, right? The bamboo handle. There they are there. You see three bamboo handles that are just in the middle of the road. Later on they got much more sophisticated, much more sophisticated. There's yours truly. Let's leave that and all the tasks and those sorts of things. We'll go on to the actual proper as well. And before we do though, what I want to say is that during our time in Vietnam, we worked in teams of 2, right? And ultimately, these teams of 2 were attached to platoons. Now, with an infantry battalion, you've got 4 companies. With 4 companies, you've got, within each company, you've got 3 platoons, right? Initially, when we started off, we started working on the battalion headquarters. But the problem was all these booby traps were found by the soldiers out in the field, right? So we had to get from battalion headquarters out to the field. It took hours. So what happened was we finished up putting 2 teams of 2, which was called a sprinter team, with each one of the forward platoons. And then when something was found, the engineers were up there straight away, right? Now this was something that was against our principles, right? Concentration of effort was one of our principles. You don't break up engineers, but this is the best way to work. And guess what? That has been right through the army, right through the next 7 years, and even totally in Afghanistan, and today is one of the ways that we work, right? Calling splinter teams, mini teams, those sort of things. That's what happens. The other thing I was going to quickly come back to was mines and minefields. We had a huge minefield in Vietnam, and this minefield should never have been built. I could go on about this for hours, right? Should never have been built. Barrier minefield. The engineers were against it, but if you're ordered to do it, you do it. And what the enemy did was take out the mines. Now when the enemy took out the mines, right, you've got this, a mine is an American jumping jack mine. So you've got the mine coming, you tread on the mine, and the mine jumps up out of the ground. You've got 2 kilos of explosive, right, that goes off about waist high. And it's a depth of 100 metres diameter. And you won't survive. And it was bad news. Now those mines were used against us from 1968 to 1971. 1967 to 1971, because of the enemy, and that was really bad news. And it was our mines that were the bad news, and we got over half our casualties in Vietnam, and engineers particularly suffered the most casualties, right? The most casualties in Vietnam. I'm talking about percentage of population, percentage of guys there, and it was our boys that same thing in Afghanistan. Engineers, because the engineers moved forward to delouse these mines. The critical thing here is training, right? And making sure that the guys know that it's their job to do it. And they became really proud to do it, even though death often was the result. Okay? So what we'll do now is let's do this video, right?
So how much training would they have for that?
How much training? You mean
How many months?
Yeah.
well, 13 weeks, right? did in Vietnam was each team of two, mini team, sprinter team, was made up of number one and number two, right? So number one was the guy who had the experience in Vietnam. He had the experience. And number two was the new boy, right? So then when number one went home back to Australia, number two became the number one. You with me? So how much training? Could be 6 months training, you know? On the job training, experience on the job, you know, that sort of thing. And that's the way we work.